My dad needs special meals for his condition. Nancy, can you make them for him? While I was still processing this unexpected request, standing in front of a man in a wheelchair, my eldest son's wife, Christina, spoke up. What? You want me to make those meals? Well, there's no one else we can ask but you, Nancy. From what she told me, 6 months ago, Christina's parents were in a car accident. Her mother died, and her father, Benjamin, became paralyzed from the waist down. Are you seriously expecting me to take care of him, Christina? If you don't do it, Nancy, who else will take care of Dad then? This is a major responsibility, and I haven't heard anything about it. While I was still reeling from the shock, my eldest son, Brian, chimed in. We're about to go on a trip abroad. We won a vacation to Hawaii in a raffle at the mall the other day. It'd be a shame to cancel it now, right? This is unbelievable. He is your dear father. I'm sure he'd prefer to be taken care of by his own blood rather than by a complete stranger like me. Yet, you're planning to leave your own father with someone he doesn't even know while you go off on a fun vacation abroad. My heart felt like it was being crushed. Unlike when I was taking care of my own husband in our house, living in an apartment now means dealing with stairs. How am I supposed to manage taking care of someone in a wheelchair all by myself? I was incredibly angry at my daughter-in-law, who seemed to care more about her own enjoyment than her family, and at Brian, who just followed along with whatever she said. Please, just do this for us. We're going to miss our flight. With that, Brian and Christina left for the airport. In the now silent parking lot, Benjamin was left behind, staring blankly into space. A heavy atmosphere weighed down on my heart. My name is Nancy. I'm 61 years old. I work part-time and live a modest life as an ordinary housewife. 5 years ago, I lost my husband, Edward, to illness after being together for many years. After that, I moved to a small apartment. The house we lived in was one Edward had built when he was young, but after he passed away, and with our only son now living on his own, there were too many unused rooms. It feels even lonelier in this house without anyone to talk to. Talking to Edward's photo every day, the feeling of loneliness grew, which was one reason I decided to move. The new apartment was a bit further from the town where I used to live, but the supermarket I work at is close by, and it's just right for living alone. The landlord and the neighbors were all friendly and cheerful people, so I quickly got used to my new life. By the way, the house we sold fetched a decent price, but I've never been one for luxury. Also, I consider the money from the sale to be something Edward left for me. I should save this money for an emergency. With that thought, I became even more frugal than before. My only pleasure was the monthly dinners with my housewife friends, where we enjoyed good food. I'm sure my late Edward is up in heaven now. Why don't you treat yourself a bit more? He'd probably be saying with an amused smile. One day, my eldest son Brian, who lives far away, came to visit me for the first time in a while. Seeing Brian again for the first time since Edward's 2-year anniversary felt surreal. Brian, who works as a construction worker, has become tanned and looks every bit the carpenter since I last saw him. Every time we meet, I can't help but comment on how much he's changed. Again with that? I'm 33 now. I'm in charge of the younger guys at the site. You need to realize I've grown up. He would respond, somewhat embarrassed. To me, you'll always be my child. Aren't you lonely living here all by yourself? Brian, perhaps to cover his own embarrassment, suddenly changed the subject. I'm not exactly in a position to live luxuriously, but as a son, I worry about my elderly mom living alone. The Brian I once thought of as a child now showed concern for me. While feeling proud of him. Thanks, but I still feel young. I'm not old enough to need to rely on someone as inexperienced as you. I tried to show some bravado. Well, if you're doing fine, I guess it's not my place to interfere. He fell silent for a while, then after a moment to collect his thoughts. The truth is, I'm thinking of getting married soon. He looked me straight in the eye, speaking with a formal tone. Really? Congratulations! You're finally getting a wife. So, what's she like? How old is she? What does she do? I bombarded him with questions in my excitement. Her name is Christina, she's 3 years younger than me. She works at a boutique, and we met at a party. Brian hesitated to talk about how they met, but that didn't matter to me. How you met doesn't matter. If you're getting married, I'm thrilled for you. Congratulations, Brian. I reaffirmed my happiness for my son. After we get married, I'll make sure to visit regularly. If that's okay with you, of course. There's no problem with that. I always welcome you. But won't Christina mind if I'm too involved? I've heard that young women today don't like their mothers-in-law meddling. I don't think Christina would mind. She's kind-hearted, has a lovely smile, and I'm sure you'll like her. That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to meeting her. And if you two have children, you better show me my grandchild soon. That's probably why mothers-in-law get a bad reputation. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, I just want to enjoy my life with her. You're right. I'm sorry. A week later, Brian brought his fiancée Christina to meet me. Nice to meet you, Nancy. I'm Christina. Well, what a lovely smile you have. Nice to meet you too. I knew she was 30, but she looked even younger and was as charming as Brian had said. Brian is really lucky to have found her. I thought to myself, just as, is this family home an apartment? Not a house? Christina furrowed her brow and questioned Brian. I told you before, didn't I? Mom sold the house and moved. Brian whispered to her, trying to keep me from hearing. Pretending I hadn't heard. It's a small place, but come in and have some tea. I welcomed them. Christina peered into my room from the entrance. This is unbelievable. I could never be friends with someone living in such an old apartment. And exclaimed loudly, Hey, Christina. Brian tried to stop her, but it seemed she didn't hear him. We're getting married, Brian. There's no need to greet a complete stranger, especially not the mother-in-law. I turned off the stove, the water no longer boiling. Yes, that's right, just a complete stranger. The joyous feeling I had vanished, replaced by a dark cloud. All right, Brian, now that we've greeted Nancy, let's go. I have some shopping to do. Christina quickly descended the stairs to the parking lot. Is she really the right person for you? I asked Brian, my voice filled with concern. She has her good sides too. Brian defended Christina and then left with her. A month passed without any word from Brian. Hey Brian. I know you're busy, but what about the wedding plans? I finally decided to call my son. Brian sighed deeply, sounding burdened. Christina has her own schedule. When the wedding plans are finalized, I'll let you know. He answered apologetically. Is that so? I don't mind the timing. But we need to inform the relatives, so you should tell me the details soon. I know. Don't get mad. I'm hanging up now. Hello? Brian raised his voice slightly. I'm not mad. I just want to know the details of the wedding. Brian laughed. Sorry. It's not about you. Just something else. Seriously, how long are you going to be on the phone? I heard Christina's annoyed voice in the background. Christina is there? Could you put her on? I've only met her once. Ouch. All right, I'm hanging up. Sorry, Mom, we have something urgent now. I'll call you later. Brian hung up abruptly without waiting for my response. Is she already controlling him before the marriage? I wondered to myself. If they're happy, I should stay out of it. I tried to convince myself. But another month went by without any contact from Brian. Hey Mom, it's been a while. Glad to see you're doing well. Brian showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. Are you two really doing okay? Brian looked apologetic. We actually already had the wedding. I was stunned. What? We haven't even informed the relatives. Christina said it wasn't necessary. What do you mean? She said she couldn't invite someone living in an old, musty apartment to the wedding. I couldn't believe my ears. Christina had said something that cruel. So, her parents attended? Of course. Lots of relatives and friends were there. It was quite a lively event. Brian had a cheerful smile as he recounted a happy memory. Seeing his attitude made me feel so exasperated that I almost burst into tears. How can you laugh so carefree when your own mother has been left out like this? Brian, trying to be considerate in his own way, said, That's why I'm here to see you, Mom. I'll keep visiting her regularly, so don't worry. He said that, but after visiting 2 or 3 more times, he completely stopped coming. Even when I occasionally called him, he would cut the conversation short, saying he was busy. Brian used to be so straightforward, but maybe he's been influenced by Christina. My doubts about Brian began to grow. About 6 months after the wedding, Brian called me for the first time in a while. I'm thinking of coming over this weekend. Aren't you busy with work? Are you sure you have the time? Honestly, I was happy my son was coming to see me, but I expressed my concern for his schedule instead. It's fine. Besides, this time I'm not just coming alone. Christina and her family are planning to come along too. Is that okay with you? Christina's family? You mean her parents? Yeah. You haven't met them yet, right? Of course not. You guys went ahead and had the wedding without telling me, so I never had a chance to meet them. When I lightly protested, Brian laughed on the other end of the line. I've apologized for that many times. Christina suggested that we should all meet this time. She did? Really? I was surprised that Christina wanted to introduce her family to me. This is the same woman who mocked me for living in a shabby apartment and didn't invite me to the wedding. What could have changed? Nevertheless, I was genuinely happy that my son was taking the time to come see me, despite his busy schedule. Even if Christina had some ulterior motive, I had no reason to refuse their visit. All right. This weekend then. I'll be looking forward to it. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it. I felt a bit uneasy about the excitement in his voice. Why would he be thanking me for this? There was no reason I should be thanked for meeting Christina and her family. Besides, there was another thing that worried me. It might not be a big deal, but my current apartment is just right for one person. It wasn't meant to accommodate a large group. So, if Brian, Christina, and her family came over, there wouldn't be enough space. Well, if it comes to that, we can just go to a nearby cafe. Thinking that, I didn't take the problem too seriously. On the day Brian and his wife were supposed to visit, I felt restless from the morning. I usually keep the place clean, so it wasn't too dirty. But since important guests were coming, I cleaned more thoroughly than usual. Cleaning done, laundry done. All set. Just as I finished hanging the laundry on the balcony, I heard a familiar car engine stopping in the parking lot downstairs. I smiled at myself in the bathroom mirror, practicing over and over again. I have to make a bright impression. Though Christina was one thing, I imagined what her parents, whom I had yet to meet, might look like and rehearsed my greetings in my head countless times. I listened carefully at the front door, hoping to hear footsteps coming up the stairs, but the stairs remained eerily silent. Curious, I opened the door and looked down at the parking lot to see Brian and Christina doing something around Brian's familiar car. Christina was unfolding a wheelchair, and Brian was helping a man out of the back seat. The man had some gray hair, but he looked a bit too young to be called elderly. And the man being helped seemed unaccustomed to the situation, moving awkwardly with Brian. I quickly ran down the stairs and headed toward Brian and the others. "Mom, you came to welcome us." Brian noticed me and smiled. "Let me introduce you. This is Christina's father, Benjamin. As you can see, he's in a wheelchair." Oh, my. Feeling sorry for the man in the wheelchair, I was at a loss for words. "Dad prefers special meals. Nancy, can you make something for him?" Christina suddenly said something outrageous. "What? You want me to make special meals?" I was bewildered by the unexpected request, and Christina added, "Who else is there? You're the only one we can ask, Nancy." She said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world, smiling all the while. "It was right after our wedding, so about 6 months ago. Mom and Dad got into a car accident while on a drive. Mom passed away, and Dad miraculously survived. He just got out of the hospital recently, but he's paralyzed on one side and is in a state of shock, so he really needs the family's support." Oh, that's a pity. I felt genuine sympathy for Benjamin. But then I tilted my head in confusion. So why do I have to make his special meals? I thought it was only natural that Christina, his daughter, should make and feed her father. I asked Christina. Christina, with a pouty smile, said, "I'm just not suited for caregiving. If Mom were alive, she would have done it, but since she's gone, there's no one else." "Are you really expecting me to take care of him, Christina?" "Yes, as I've been saying. If you don't do it, who else will take care of Dad?" Christina said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I haven't heard anything about this." I was stunned by the sudden turn of events. "But we talked about it on the phone, remember? Bringing Christina's family over. You promised you'd take care of her dad." Brian looked at me, surprised. "I don't remember making any such promise." "Really? Well, anyway, that's the plan now. So I'll be counting on you to take care of Edward for a while." "Thanks." Brian gave a slight bow. "It's not like I can just accept this so easily." "I can't believe you're springing this on me. We have stairs here, and how is Benjamin going to manage living with a complete stranger?" Benjamin stared blankly into space, unable to articulate his feelings. "Isn't it the family's responsibility to take care of their own? Look at me, Nancy. Can't you see I'm not cut out for heavy lifting?" "We're going on a trip. We won a trip to Hawaii at the shopping mall raffle. Canceling it now would be such a waste." Even though Benjamin didn't say anything, I knew he would prefer his daughter's care over that of a stranger like me. Yet Christina was pushing Benjamin onto me and planning to go to Hawaii without a care. "This is unbelievable," I fumed. Ignoring my frustration, Christina continued. "If you don't feel comfortable with just you, why not hire a professional home care worker? Brian told me you got a lot of money from selling your previous house." I glared at Brian. Brian quickly looked away. You told her that? Christina was already seated in the car, honking the horn to signal they were ready to leave. We have no choice but to rely on you, Mom. Sorry, but we're going to miss our flight. With that, he got into the driver's seat, started the car, and drove off before I could stop them. Benjamin stood there silently in the deserted parking lot, staring into the void. Nancy, what's going on? Helen, the landlord, had come out to see what the commotion was about. I was at my wit's end and explained the situation to her. Helen shook her head. That is ridiculous. There are stairs here, and it's hard for one woman to handle caregiving alone. But we can't just leave him out here. We need to get him to his room at least. Honey, is Matthew around? Helen, grasping the situation, called out for Matthew, who lived in the same apartment complex. Matthew, a 47-year-old man, worked for an equipment company during the week. He had a strong build from playing rugby in college. I'm so sorry to bother you on your day off. I apologized, bowing my head slightly. No problem. We help each other out in times of need. Matthew easily lifted Benjamin onto his back, while I folded the wheelchair and carried it to my apartment. We got him to the room, but the question is what to do next. Helen sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the situation as if it were her own problem. I'll help as much as I can whenever I have the time. She offered. I can help on my days off too. I'm strong, so feel free to rely on me. Matthew said with a big smile. Nancy, you always share your stew with me. I've been looking for a chance to return the favor. The heavy atmosphere lifted slightly, bringing me a sense of peace. Just then, Brian called. Oh, I forgot to mention, could you also take care of our 2 dogs? They need to be walked twice a day, morning and evening, and fed. The food and leashes are in our shed. Thanks. Brian said casually, as if it were just a side note while shopping. Hold on a second. You're not suggesting the dog sitting is going to be at your place, right? What are you talking about? Of course, it's going to be at our house. It might be a bit far, but please take care of it. Bye. He hung up before I could respond, cutting off the conversation just after delivering his demands. Brian and his wife's house is a 2-hour drive from here. Without a car, I have no choice but to use public transportation, transferring between trains and buses. Plus, I have to take care of Benjamin as well. If I have to do this commute every day until Brian and his wife return, it will be a huge expense. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. While Nancy takes care of the dogs, I'll take care of Benjamin. I have experience taking care of my late husband. Helen kindly suggested. That's not necessary. I've had enough. Those 2 need to make amends for their mistakes. I resolved to get back at my son and his wife and discussed my plan with Helen and Matthew. Both Helen and Matthew agreed with my idea. You're right. This is too much for you to handle alone. Exactly. They need to learn a lesson. They both supported my decision wholeheartedly. Benjamin, in a room with no familiar faces, was biting his lower lip, probably feeling lonely. As Benjamin stared intently at me, I had a sense he wanted to convey something. Benjamin, do you have something you want to tell me? Benjamin gripped my hand tightly. Thanks to his rehabilitation, his grip was stronger than I had expected. Bringing his face close to my ear, he said haltingly but clearly, "Give them a good scolding." Seeing the determined look in his eyes, I nodded. Please leave it to me. With his strong will confirmed, my resolve became unshakable. But even though I wanted to get back at them, I couldn't just abandon him. Doing that would make me no better than Brian and his wife, who left for their trip. Instead, I decided to use legitimate means to shock and unsettle them. I contacted an old acquaintance, a care worker who had helped with my late husband's illness. The care worker, though retired, said, "I understand. So, you want us to take care of Benjamin at the care facility until your son returns from his trip?" She assured me that she still had connections at her former workplace. "You're the only one I can rely on. I'll pay all the expenses up front." Within an hour of our conversation, a transport bus from the care facility arrived. "Please take care of Benjamin. Leave it to us." The strong staff easily lifted Benjamin onto the bus, taking him to the care facility. Benjamin's problem is solved. Now for the next step. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders and immediately moved on to the next part of my plan. I called the animal welfare organization Matthew had found. A couple I know left 2 dogs behind while they went on an overseas trip. "Can you please take them in?" "Of course. There have certainly been some terrible pet owners out there." And so, both dogs were safely taken in by an animal welfare organization. "But aren't you worried that your sons might complain about this later?" Despite Helen's concern, I replied, "I'm planning to move out and return to my hometown. I don't have any relatives left there, but I never want to see my son and his wife again." "That might be for the best." Helen supported my decision, smiling a little sadly. A few days later, I paid Helen the penalty fee. "Once I'm settled over there, I'll send you some local specialties. If anything comes up, I'll give you a call." Helen saw me off with a smile. Later, after I'd settled into living alone in my hometown, Helen called me. She detailed what happened after Brian and Christina returned from their trip. When the two arrived at the apartment I had lived in. "Mom, open up. It's me, your son. Dad's here too, right? Are you taking good care of the dogs?" But when there was no response despite their calls, Christina kicked the door in frustration. "What's going on? It's so noisy." A burly man suddenly appeared, and the two of them shrank back, hugging each other. Helen, watching in silence, told them I had already moved out of the apartment. "So where's my father? And the dogs? Abandoning everything is just inexcusable." Christina shamelessly berated me, Helen said. In reality, a new tenant had moved in right after I left, and it was now someone else's apartment. At that moment, several police officers arrived. Standing there in shock, the two were taken in by the police to explain the abandonment of Benjamin and the dogs. There was such a commotion outside the apartment that a crowd gathered. It was quite a scene. Helen laughed as she recounted the events. Although they weren't arrested, it seemed an irreparable rift had formed between Brian and Christina. Brian frequently called my smartphone. "She doesn't act like a wife at all, and whenever I come home tired from work, she just complains." The more he talked, the angrier he got, his words pouring out like a broken dam, filled with complaints about Christina. "We ended up getting divorced. It's all your fault, Mom. Why did you have to do something so ridiculous?" But blaming me for it was entirely unjustified. Who's being ridiculous here, really? I responded lightly and had no intention of further arguing. With the costs of taking care of Christina's dad and the dogs, and having just built a new house, we're still in legal disputes over property rights. If things go badly for me, it could be financially tough. So, Mom, you have a part in this too. What's going on? This is strange. Mom? Are you even listening to me? Hello? Mom? Maybe it's because we're in the countryside? The signal is bad. Please, can't we meet and talk just once? His constant nagging on the phone became unbearable, so I finally hung up. I quickly set his number to block calls. Then, placing my hands together in front of my late husband's photo. The tomatoes are starting to ripen. I'll be heading to the garden today. I'm currently enjoying a peaceful life, funded by the sale of my house. Your cooking makes me want to vomit. Flora, my son's wife, whispered this only for me to hear, but I ignored it. Today is my grandson Frederick's birthday party, and we're planning to celebrate it grandly with relatives invited. I didn't want to be swayed by just Flora's opinion. Without minding her, I carried a large platter with meatloaf next. Seeing this, Flora stood up and started yelling loudly. Seriously, what is this? You expect us to eat that? Such tasteless, vulgar food, I don't want to eat it. I've had enough. Flora grabbed the large platter of meatloaf from my hands and slammed it onto the table with force. The relatives looked at Flora with surprised faces. The dish shattered into pieces, and the scattered food stained the clothes of the relatives, who started angrily blaming Flora. My son David also stood up and put his hand on Flora's shoulder to calm her down. Hey, Flora. Calm down. You be quiet. Why are there so many country bumpkins here? I'm so sick of it. I feel like vomiting. I shouldn't have come. She then picked up a plate of food left on the table and threw it at me. I felt more disgusted than angry at Flora's behavior. You seem to be mistaken, but I didn't make this. Huh? Then who made this crap? It was me. The voice was so loud it seemed impossible it came from an elderly person, and the glass doors shook. I'm Ashley. Born into an ordinary family, I spent my life without any particular incidents. I did well enough in studies, so I didn't have trouble getting into college. In university, surrounded by good friends, I had a fun college life and graduated without issue. I found a job at a local company, and during my busy days, I met the man who would become my husband. It seemed we both had love at first sight. We started dating immediately, and about a month later, decided to get married. My husband was a wonderful person, and I was very proud of him. Our family and friends blessed us, and we had our wedding ceremony without delay, and soon after, I gave birth to our son David. It was my first time parenting, but it wasn't hard because my mother Morgan helped. I thought about how smooth and trouble-free my life had been. But maybe I was getting complacent. Gradually, I began to find life boring. That's when people tend to fall into life's pitfalls. It started when my husband's returns home began to get late. Then his business trips unnaturally increased, and he was away from home more and more. I tried to ignore the doubts swelling in my heart, clinging to the sweet illusion that he wouldn't do such things, but the reality was cruel. I found out he was having affairs with several women. When one of their husbands came to confront him at our home. At first, my husband didn't admit his guilt, but as evidence piled up, he cried like a child. Eventually, we divorced, and I became a single mother, raising David. At that moment, I felt as if my life had ended. I had lived without hardships, never stumbling, so I had no strength to resist. Because I was complacent, I couldn't even consult with friends. I desperately wanted help, but weird pride got in the way. However, parents are there to help in such times. My mother didn't blame or comfort me. She just said, "Ashley, you have me and your friends. But David only has you." Over the phone. With those words, I resolved to raise David properly. To do that, I decided to throw away all my silly pride, rely on others, and raise David with the help of many people. My son never had serious injuries or illnesses, and his grades were excellent. He went on to high school, the local university, and graduated safely. He got a job in a local company, moved out, and became independent. When I looked around David's empty room, I couldn't help but cry. There was loneliness, but more than that, a sense of accomplishment. But there was one thing I worried about for David. Like me, He had never faced any major failures. If he encountered a significant setback in life, could he endure it? That was my only concern, but I was prepared to support David when the time came. After David became independent, I terminated the house lease and decided to return to my parents' house. It was too big for one person and felt lonely, and with my father passed away, I was worried about my elderly mother being alone. But returning home, I realized my worries were unnecessary. My mother was as energetic as ever, bustling around. Ashley, if you're bored, get moving. Make some money. All right, I got it. In this way, it feels more like I'm the one being taken care of by my mother. Still, she seemed happy I came back, and when there was no work, we'd spend time together, reminiscing about the old days. A short while after David became independent, he called me. Mom, it's been a while. How are ya? I'm fine, thanks. What's up all of a sudden? Is something wrong? Since David had lived at home and rarely stayed out, having a phone conversation felt somewhat fresh. I was thinking of spending my summer vacation at home. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Though, don't expect any special treatment. Despite saying that, I was really happy inside. I wanted to ask about his job and how his social relationships were going. Then, I'll call you again when I'm coming back. Sure, I'll be looking forward to it. Be careful on your way here. After hanging up, I immediately started planning in my head. The room over there should be fine, but it needs to be cleaned up. And I need to think about what to cook too. As I was talking to myself, my mother approached me. David's coming back? We'll need to prepare quite a bit then. My mother seemed motivated knowing her grandson was coming. Mom, he's my son, so I'll do the preparations. What are you talking about? That boy loves what I make. I absolutely want to make it for him. Once this happens, my mother won't listen to anything else. We prepared the room so David could relax comfortably and went shopping for groceries. Having something to look forward to is a good thing. It makes the heart light, and somehow, the scenery around seems brighter. And finally, the summer vacation arrived. We went to pick up David from the station and headed home. Seeing David after a long time, he had matured, turning into a full-fledged man. My mother was waiting eagerly at home. We rejoiced at our reunion. The dining table was filled with dishes made by my mother and I. We talked and caught up while eating, and time flew by quickly. When the conversation settled down a bit, David, have you found someone nice? My mother suddenly asked. David blushed and looked down. Maybe he really had found someone. The thought made my heart race uncontrollably. David, don't tell me you really have. Yeah, actually, I've recently started dating someone. My mother and I were overjoyed and cheered loudly. The conversation then centered around his girlfriend. David, though embarrassed, answered our questions properly. It seems she works at the same company, and they hit it off right away. Actually, I came back to tell you that. Eventually, I'm thinking of marrying her. Really? Oh, that makes me so happy. What a wonderful summer vacation this turned out to be. Next time, I'll bring her over. I want to introduce her, he said shyly, looking somewhat young to me, reminding me he's always my son. After a delightful summer vacation, half a year later, in winter, it happened. As promised, David brought his girlfriend to our home. The outside was covered in snow, a stark contrast to the summer vacation. My mother and I sat facing David and his girlfriend with serious expressions. All right, this is my girlfriend, Flora. She greeted us. Nice to meet you. I'm Flora. Her first impression was of a polite lady. She seemed a bit shy, but her words were careful, and her expression was kind. I liked Flora right away. Thank you for choosing David. Well, sure. At first, our conversation was a bit awkward. But after a while, the tension eased, and we all started to enjoy the conversation. Seeing them sitting together, I thought they really suited each other. And so I teased them. You two really are a good match. Why not get married soon? But this wasn't a joke. I genuinely thought they should marry. They were embarrassed, but they didn't seem to mind. No, Mom, if you say so, maybe we should just go ahead and get the marriage certificate now. Hee hee, shall we go get it now? We joked like this. Then, after a while, the two of them got married. The wedding ceremony was very glamorous, and I felt incredibly happy. But there was a small worry in my heart. For some reason, I kept remembering the time I divorced my husband. Even though I know David's different. And Flora is a wonderful person too. Yet, I couldn't shake off this unpleasant feeling. Contrary to my worries, their married life was going smoothly. Soon, Flora got pregnant and Frederick was born. Being my first grandchild, he was so adorable. Looking at Frederick, I thought my worries were finally disappearing. But it was around that time things started to get strange. After giving birth, Flora somehow started to avoid me. I initially thought it was because she was not feeling well after the birth. Yet, when I tried to help her out, "Ashley, don't touch Frederick," she would scream loudly. And not just that. Every time I tried to do something, "Don't! I'll take care of it. Ashley, don't interfere. Why are you doing things on your own? Stop it. Enough is enough," she would snap at me, leaving me utterly confused. Sure, nobody likes to be meddled with, but her reaction seemed a bit excessive. It felt as if she thought of me as some virus or something, which truly hurt me. So, I decided to distance myself from Flora for a while. I thought she might calm down, and things would return to normal after some time. Time passed, but Flora never contacted me. Despite having my first grandchild, I couldn't hold him. I wanted to see Frederick's face and have a good talk with David and Flora. But they never came to visit me. My mother seemed somewhat concerned too. I thought about calling them myself, but recalling Flora's yelling made it hard for me to gather the courage. However, I couldn't stand it anymore and decided to visit Flora. Of course, I knew showing up at her house without an appointment was rude, but I wanted to see them so badly. I prepared immediately and headed for Flora's house. I knew it was in a residential area near the station, so I drove there, following the map app. It was the middle of summer, and the trees in the park were lush. I reminisced about the summer vacation when David came back. I was happy when I heard about Flora, but I never imagined things would turn out like this. Thoughts of my husband flickered through my mind. Get out of my head already. Mumbling to myself, I kept driving. A few minutes later, I arrived at Flora's house. After parking my car in front, I walked towards her house. I could feel my heartbeat. And that's how nervous I was. I pressed the doorbell of Flora's house. After a while, Flora's voice came through the intercom. "Who is it?" "Ah, Flora, it's me, Ashley. Sorry for showing up unannounced." I tried to speak gently, hoping not to upset Flora. But such consideration was wasted on Flora. As soon as she heard my voice, she became hostile. "What? Why are you here?" "I was worried you might be having a hard time." "Shut up! Who asked you to come? Leave." "But I wanted to see Frederick's face, and—" "Shut up! Shut up! If you don't leave, I'll call the police." No matter what I said, Flora wouldn't listen. Fearing she would call the police, I had no choice but to leave. Walking back alone, I headed towards a nearby park. I wanted to see Frederick even for a moment, so I thought of calling Flora to persuade her. It was a hot time in summer, so the park was deserted. I sat on a bench in the shade and called Flora. "Hello, Flora?" "What is it now? You are creepy." "Please, I just want to talk." "Shut up! There's nothing to talk about." Flora was hysterical as ever. I tried not to be overwhelmed by her voice, attempting to persuade her. "I just want to spend a little time together." "Give me a break. I'm so fed up. Let me tell you, I've hated you, Ashley, from the start." Flora threw such harsh words at me, it was hard to believe she was the same person. Hate? Did I do something? It's your existence. It's just so lonely. That's why you have a divorce history. That's irrelevant, isn't it? I was outraged, as her words were far too cruel. Even if you hate me, we're family since you married, aren't we? That's no way to talk. Family? Don't make me laugh. I didn't want to work, so I just wanted to get married quickly and be supported by a husband. It just happened to be David. Oh, stop it. Saying such things, you're the worst, you know? Shut up. Shut up. Don't you ever call me again. Go spend your remaining years in the countryside. With that, Flora hung up. I couldn't move for a while. Shocked by how terrible she was and angry at myself for not seeing through her, but it was too late for regrets. Feeling down, I left the park, got into my car, and drove home. I thought about contacting David, but I didn't want to burden him with unnecessary worries since he was busy with work. I asked my mother to listen to my complaints. However, I vented to my mother. Time will change things. We just have to trust the person David chose, my mother said reassuringly. So, I decided to be patient. Time passed, and Frederick was about to turn 3. I called David. David? It's been a while. Mom, sorry I haven't been in touch. I've been really busy. It's okay. But I want to see Frederick too, and next month is his birthday, right? I'd love to celebrate it at our house. Frederick would love that. Let me see if I can arrange some time off. David was unaware of what had happened between me and Flora. So, he readily agreed to my suggestion. I could hear David and Flora talking in the background over the phone. She seemed reluctant to see me. But after some persuasion from David, it sounded like she agreed. Flora's okay with it. So, we'll come over next month. Great. I'm so happy. Can we invite the relatives too? Make it a big celebration? Of course. Sorry to trouble you. No trouble at all. I'll be looking forward to it. I was thrilled to finally see David and his family, so I immediately shared the news with my mother. So, they're coming back? Then I'll have to cook up a storm. My mother said, eager to get started. I enthusiastically contacted relatives to invite them to Frederick's birthday party. Time flew, and soon it was the day of the party. It was spring, and colorful flowers bloomed around our house. As relatives arrived, David's family did too. Frederick, now 3, walked in on his own. Frederick, nice to meet you. I'm your grandmother. I bent down to get a good look at Frederick's face. But he seemed frightened by the unfamiliar face and hid behind Flora. Oh dear, I'm sorry. That must have scared you. Don't worry. He'll get used to it soon. That's all right. You must be tired. Please, rest inside. David and his family headed to the entrance. All the relatives were smiling. Only Flora was glaring at me. It seemed our silent conflict was ongoing, but I tried not to mind. Especially since Frederick was so adorable. The living room had a large table set up for the gathering of relatives. I brought out the dishes my mother and I had prepared. Man, it's been a while since I've had Grandma and your cooking. I'm gonna eat a lot. Frederick looked curiously at the food. But Flora frowned and looked down. As I approached, she whispered so only I could hear. Just the thought of eating something you made makes me want to vomit. I was a bit angry, but chose to ignore her. I didn't want to be swayed by just Flora's opinion. Flora seemed even more upset than before for ignoring her, and with a louder voice, she said, I just don't feel like eating. Then, the relatives looked at Flora with puzzled expressions. Hey, don't say things like that. Are you tired or something? David also seemed to feel it was not good, trying to calm Flora down with a joke. Flora turned away with a sullen face. I didn't mind and carried over a large platter with meatloaf on it. Upon seeing this, Flora stood up and began to yell loudly. What is this? You expect me to eat that? The relatives looked at Flora in surprise. But she, paying no attention to them, shouted loudly, I don't want to eat such tasteless, vulgar food. I've had enough. Flora took the platter of meatloaf from my hands and slammed it onto the table with force. The dish shattered, and the scattered food soiled the clothes of the relatives, who angrily blamed Flora. David stood up, trying to calm Flora by placing his hand on her shoulder. However, she still glared at me. This is peasant food. It's not fit for humans to eat. It's fish feed. Hey, Flora. Calm down. You be quiet. Why are there so many country bumpkins here anyway? I'm so sick of it. I wish I hadn't come. She grabbed a plate of food left on the table and threw it at me. Her behavior was far from sane. I felt more creeped out than angry at such a sight of Flora. It seems you're misunderstanding, but I didn't make this. Huh? Then who made this crap? It was me. My mother answered loudly to Flora's question. Really, what's all the fuss about? Ruining a perfectly good meal. Are you even a parent, Flora? My mother's voice was so loud, it seemed impossible for someone of advanced age, making the glass doors tremble. However, Flora was unyielding. I don't care who made it. Don't serve such vulgar food. What kind of harassment is this? Listen, this meatloaf is David's favorite. Your behavior is far more rude. Shut up. The vulgar ones are you guys. Ignorant country bumpkins. Frederick finally reached his limit of tolerance and burst into tears. David hurriedly took Frederick to another room. Yet, Flora didn't care at all. She continued to spout her incomprehensible theories to the relatives. I was truly furious with Flora. Everyone had adjusted their schedules for today, and buying the ingredients cost a significant amount of money. And preparing the meal was also a lot of work. I couldn't forgive Flora for ignoring all these efforts. I slapped Flora hard in earnest. The sound echoed in the room, and Flora, holding her cheek, stared at me in shock. Then my mother shouted, I will not accept you as my granddaughter-in-law. The relatives around probably felt the same, all staring silently at Flora. But Flora became even more hysterical, beyond help. Her eyes bloodshot, spitting saliva, she no longer listened to anyone's voice. Then David ran back, grabbed Flora by the shoulders, and shook her. Enough! If you hate it here so much, leave right now. David must have been thoroughly fed up with Flora's hysteria. Even Flora, regaining her senses, stormed out of the house, got into her car, and drove away with a burst of speed. Afterward, the chaos ensued. We had to clean up the scattered food on the floor. But the angry relatives were still causing a commotion. The birthday party turned into a chaotic situation. However, it was my mother's words that broke the chaos. Everyone, be quiet. If you have time to talk, help clean up. Realizing this, everyone quietly began to clean. Luckily, the damage to the food was minimal, and there was still plenty left, including another platter of meatloaf. Frederick had stopped crying, so he rejoined everyone. Before we started the birthday party again, I deeply apologized to the relatives. I'm truly sorry, everyone. I apologize for the trouble caused, despite you all gathering here. David also apologized deeply next to me. Please let me apologize as well. I'm sorry for the rude remarks Flora made. However, no one blamed us. Instead, they praised us for speaking up. I'm really grateful to all the relatives. With our apologies, the matter with Flora was put to rest, and we all enjoyed the meal and chatted happily. Frederick ate his meatloaf with relish, making my mother very pleased. The relatives doted on Frederick, calling his name affectionately. Despite the difficulties, the birthday party ended smoothly, and everyone dispersed. We saw off each relative one by one until only 4 of us were left in the house. There's still cleaning up to do, right? Let me help. It's okay. You must be worried about Flora. Why don't you head back? Upon hearing Flora's name, David sighed deeply. Actually, I've been troubled by Flora's behavior for a while now. I thought she was just tired being postpartum, but it never improved. David gazed at Frederick playing with my mother. After pondering for a while, he finally spoke up. After this incident, I've made a decision. I need to reevaluate my relationship with Flora. I might even consider divorce. I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, it seemed inevitable to me. It can't be helped. I thought I was living a smooth life, and then I got divorced. These things happen in life. Thinking back on my past made me a bit sad. I worried that because I had divorced, David might end up doing the same. Well, that's true. But what worries me is Frederick. The custody will probably go to Flora. There's no use worrying about that. What will be, will be. David and I looked at each other and smiled. Somehow, an unfounded confidence that everything would work out filled our hearts. Within a month, David and Flora had divorced. I was worried about the custody, but Flora said, "I don't want him. He'll just get in the way of me remarrying," and easily gave up her parental rights. She left David's house and disappeared somewhere. So, her whereabouts are unknown. I decided to move in with David to support him, as he was busy with work. David might remarry someday, but he thought it was better to focus on work for now. My mother stayed at the family home due to old age. However, we make sure to visit the family home several times a year. She looks forward to these visits and seems to be keeping busy. Frederick was lonely for a while after Flora left. But he quickly got used to me, and now he seems very happy. Despite everything, we're living very happy days now.